All right, hello, I'm David Schiff, NavalX Director of Strategic Engagements. Welcome to another NavalX Seaside Chat from the Garden in Alexandria, Virginia, today, August 12, 2020. NavalX is the superconductor cell for the Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. Amongst our many lines of effort, we created Seaside Chats last year to better connect our naval workforce with topics of importance and subject matter experts. Today we're proud to present U.S. Navy and Marine Corps leadership perspectives on ANTX, an ongoing technology demonstration of critical importance to naval warfighters, R&D and acquisition communities, industry, and academia. Before I turn over to our moderator and panel for this exciting topic, I want to emphasize a few things. One, we're honoring COVID space restrictions here at the Garden. Two, this event is unclassified, non-FOUO, and being recorded. Three, we will take questions later in the Zoom Gov Q&A. And lastly, the recording will be available in a few days on the NavalX YouTube page. Now I turn over the floor to my friend and colleague Craig Sawyer from OpNav N9I and Carter Rock, who will be moderating this event, ANTX and beyond. Craig has a lot of recent experience helping run and manage ANTX events. Over to you, Craig.
So again, thank you, David, for the introduction. My name again is Craig Sawyer, coming to you live here from, well, no longer live, but here at NavalX in Alexandria, Virginia. I'd like to thank NavalX for coordinating and hosting this event and providing me the opportunity here to moderate a panel with such distinguished guests. Trying to keep through the flow of today's event. I'm going to be trying to drive through in about a 60-minute time frame, try to keep topics and questions rolling as fast as possible. I'll start with a quick scene setter and some background in my exposure to the ANTX environment. I'll do brief introductions of the panel members and then get right to the questions and maximize the time with our experts here. So again, my experience and exposure, I'm at about the 20-year point in my career of trying to deliver technology and capability to warfighters and DoD professionals. I've done this through a few lenses as a uniformed member of the SOF community, a blue-collar worker at a naval shipyard, moved on to different career paths, and eventually science advisor with Indo-PACOM and now OpNav. What's been really exciting in the last few years is my introduction to advanced naval technology exercises. My first exposure was at the U5G event in 2018. This was an urban 5th generation Marine Corps event out in California where we took about 100 technologies, brought them to bear on modern urban warfare and comms-denied environments. It was one of the few places that I've actually seen a great partnership and a very safe and experimental relationship between the warfighters, engineers, scientists, engineers, industry, academia, all get to be on the range together, working together, exploring tactics and technology, putting science and technology in context in a relevant environment. Some of the lessons that I really learned, that I really took away from that event, I can recall very clearly, very vividly. There was one experience we were looking at decision-making or battle management aids and situational awareness tools for the actual squad members and rifle team members out on the range. The Marines all had about 3 days to learn new technology, work with vendors and industry experts, trying to find applications for new technologies. In the area of battle management aids, there's probably about 20 technologies boiled down to handheld tablets, laptops, Palm Pilots that were allowing information of real-time squad movements, the ability to look around corners using drones and various live feeds. It was a really exciting time and environment. The Marines really took hold of the technology. It was really intuitive. Very welcome environment. When we actually moved on to about day 4 of the exercises, it was really interesting as the rifle teams were out on the range, moving through their normal patrols. The first artillery simulator went off, some simulated small arms fire started, and it took about 30 seconds for most of those battle management aids and those tools to hit the ground. There's this sweeping realization between the engineers and everybody that was there that day to realize, despite the best efforts of technology, we may have put the wrong tool in the hands of the operator at the wrong time. The tools just absolutely tied up the hands of the Marines, put their heads down in the middle of a firefight, and that was pretty much unacceptable. Normally what happens in an event is that might have been the end of the day, people would have gone home and said, let's go back to the drawing board and start over. In an ANTX environment, that's where the day really started. So as we cycled the Marines off the range, it was industry and engineers that would sit with the Marines and actually learn what could we do better, what was different about the technology, or how could we mold a technology that would actually be useful in the relevant environments. Ever since then, I've been a huge fan of the events. I've been a supporter and a champion for those. Without further ado, what I want to do is get to the actual leaders that actually shape, develop, and execute these events. So I'd like to start over here with Mr. Bray, who's Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, Test, and Evaluation. He's held many prominent roles, I believe as Program Executive Officer of the Integrated Weapons Systems over at NAVC. I believe a stint with Integrated Nuclear Weapons Systems, Safety and Security, many other major program roles, and a fellow alumni of Penn State. So we also have Rear Admiral Fillion, who is the current Director of Integrated Warfare at OpNav N9I. He has a very colorful career starting at the College of Charleston, turned helo pilot, has lots of interesting positions, including the, I believe, Director of Global Operations at Stratcom, command tour of the USS Wasp, and an interesting job I thought in reading through his bio was the Director of the Presidential Emergency Operations Center at the White House. We also have with us today is Brigadier General Watson, who is the current Vice Chief of Naval Research and the Commanding General for the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab. He's a graduate of Cornell and has been around the world in very colorful places such as Afghanistan, Iraq, Kosovo, and Yugoslavia. Right now, he's probably the predominant leader and champion for the ANTX events after the oversight of 2 events last year, 1 on each coast, and the upcoming event in 2021. We also have Mr. Michael Stewart, who's the Deputy Director for Integrated Warfare at OpNav N9. He's a senior executive over with us, who has a very diverse background coming from, I believe, prior service as a naval aviator to private industry, venture capital management, internal consulting with Boeing, an MBA from Harvard, before he returned back to government service with OSD and then returning back to the Navy with us now. If there's no questions or comments, I'm going to try to drive right into the questions. So the first one, I'm going to start from left to right, go down the line. If you could please briefly describe your role and how the experimentation and exercise community help inform you about the opportunities of emerging technologies and capabilities.
So honestly, I work for Admiral Fillion, but 9-9, the way we're trying to shape ANTX is we're viewing clearly the Navy as an inflection point in terms of innovation of how it's going to fight. So certainly when I left the Navy in 1996, went to industry and came back, the Navy kind of looked the same. It was CBN, it was oriented around the carrier battle group, and now we're looking at things like long-range fires, we're looking at distributed maritime operations, we're looking at unmanned. So there's a lot of innovation that could potentially be happening right now. So I view kind of my role right now and the role of an ANTX is how do I get innovation to the Navy quickly, right? Trying to figure out how to make acquisition work better, but also lower the barrier entries of emerging technologies, because what I don't want to do is have the Navy hurtling towards a place where industry was 15 years ago. I'd love to be able to leapfrog technologies, leapfrog the ability to actually integrate those new technologies, and also just be aware of those technologies, because there's clearly things that we probably don't know that industry does know. So I view my role really from a business point of view of how do I get awareness of technologies and then figure out how to integrate them quickly.
Thank you.
Good morning, Greg. Hey, to pile on what Michael just said, with inside the Warfare Integration Director, we literally buy a piece of hardware, if you will, and then see how it applies and supports the defense planning guidance, the CNO's guidance, and the Commandant's guidance. And that is an actual, accurate statement. Everything we do involves our brothers and sisters on the green side, as well as industry partners and academia. So we buy a new asset, as Michael alluded to, we want to evaluate that in experimentation. We want to see if that new piece of gear is going to deliver the capability that we believe it will in the near future and out even further than a fit, if you will. And the only comment I'll make about budget, because we're not going to talk about dollars here. That's what we do in the 9-9. Experimentation, ANTX in particular, our industry partners and our academic partners allow us to say, okay, we think this capability will do X downrange because of experimentation and evaluation capabilities. On that particular asset, we can evaluate it through experimentation, and then some of the technology and innovation that is delivered at an ANTX, we can say that technology is capable of being added to this capability that we're buying, if that makes sense. That's how ANTX plays into Warfare Integration Director.
Thank you.
Yes, good morning. So, as DASN RDT&E, my job is really looking across the whole S&T, R&D, and engineering space. So as I look across that space and support ANTX, it's really how do I bring all that talent that the Navy has organically, as well as across the board into the UARCs, FFRDCs, to bear on key warfighting problems. So as I look at the NRDE, the Naval Research and Development I see it as in the supporting role to the warfighter in these efforts. You got to start with a key operational problem. That does not come from the NRDE. That has to come from the warfighter, the op-amp side of the house, to really help us drive. Once that problem is identified, getting the warfighter in the room with the scientists and engineers from the NRDE, that is the power that I think that ANTX is bringing, and what I've seen us really get to solving some problems and applying the right technology as opposed to a forced engineering solution or a technology forcing solution in the warfighter's hands. So to me, that's the power. I view the NRDE and DASN RDT as really supporting the warfighter in this effort and helping to drive the right solutions. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Okay, so in the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab, the Marine Corps tried to create an organization that is sort of in one place can generate unity of effort towards what Mr. Bray and NavalX Fillion and Mr. Stewart have all been talking about. So within the Marine Corps, I'm responsible for concept development. So what's the operational problem, and how are we gonna get after solving it? Wargaming also falls within there. So how do we refine that operational problem and identify, not just the tactics, techniques, and procedures, but the technologies that are going to be necessary in order to be successful going forward. And then we also have S&T, science and technology, within that organization, which is where my other hat as the Vice Chief of Naval Research, working for RADM Fillion at ONR, is particularly useful, and particularly in the context of what the Commandant and CNO have been emphasizing in terms of naval integration going forward. And then we also have live force experimentation. So that whole chain from concept development, refinement through wargaming, science and technology development, and then the further utility and application of that technology in the hands of the warfighter through live force experimentation all falls within the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab.
Thank you very much. We can go into the next question here, and I think we'll kind of drive back around the right from left, going in the reverse order. So as I mentioned earlier in my introduction, I really found it fascinating from these events of the ability to actually learn fast, fail early, to move into the next iteration of what could be. So do you guys have any lessons from either your professional life on a range or actually in live exercises or live actual operations where you've realized that there's either a technology or a tactic that was improperly in use or distracting from the actual warfighting effort? And again, I'd like to start with General Watson on this one.
So I don't think I had a singular sort of aha moment like you described earlier, Craig, but I would say a couple of areas, a couple of themes that have become, I think, clear. One within last year, recent ANTX and one just for operationally. And I would say operationally, one is that there's rarely, a single technological solution to the really hard operational problems. And where that first started to become real to me was really in the counter improvised explosive device fight. Early on during our time in Iraq and Afghanistan, is that everybody's kind of looking for the magical solution that's going to neutralize those threats to our forces. But in reality, it's a combination of technology, tactics, techniques, procedures, and not one singular technology, but the application of a bunch of technologies, each of which help to nudge the odds in the favor of the good guys as we apply them. So that's one thing. And then I think just sort of a particular interest to me now in the context of General Berger's planning guidance and force design is man and unmanned teaming. And just the realization that the way we have to, and this is not original, but the way we really have to set the goalpost is towards, it is from, many Marines, one robot to, one Marine, many robots, and thinking through it multi-spectrally. So not just in a singular application, but I think speaking to your experience there and the anecdote that you told earlier, it's really amazing the capacity to think creatively in the application of technology when you put it in the hands of the young leadership.
I completely agree with the, I can remember from U5G specifically, watching, similar to your experience with the IED community, the counter UAS community right now, and what was going on at that event, the rapid iterations and the different layered efforts of working with the technologies from physical defense to electronic countermeasures. So it's really impressive to see those things iterate really fast on one of these exercises. Sorry, Mr. Bray?
Yeah, just to build off those comments again, I think your example, that management aids in C2 in particular is an area right for ANTX, because I think the power of having the warfighter with the technology and the engineer and that rapid iteration. If it's not done well, I've seen many times where we delivered C2 systems, my background on Aegis ships and things like that, creates tremendous interoperability problems for the warfighter. And I think a lot of that is because it's developed in a lab or at an industry partner and then delivered to the ship, and then we do the integration afterwards. I think doing that up front is key. A couple other simple examples. I use the combined arms, 3rd and 5th gen, and then we had, there's two examples that always resonated with me. We have the technologies, you get the brochure of the technology, but you never really know what it's like until you get to the field. And some very simple examples that I remember from that, adding 5 pounds more to a Marine's backpack is not very useful. So it may be the greatest battle management aid, but if it's something else that the Marine has to carry around, not very helpful. And so we learned that as we went out. Another thing that we typically see in ANTX is that when we put it in an operational environment. So again, at urban 5th gen, guess what? It rained. As it rained, a lot of the systems that we had, the unmanned systems and things like that, didn't quite work as well as it should have. And so, that's where I think we get the value of putting this in the operational environment with the warfighter and the engineer, and see how all that dynamics work, where the value's at. So, and then finally, just end with, I think, your example of the day doesn't end with the execution of the event. It really begins. I've seen a lot of examples where we've had academia, warfare center labs, engineers, industry, both traditional and non-traditional, after the event's done, work together to solve some problems. So the next day, the capability is much, much more better and more useful to the warfighter themselves. So a lot of power in what we do. Those are some of the areas I think seeing how they don't work is important, because it helps us learn how to make them better, right? The failure is as good as the successes.
Thank you. Admiral?
Craig, I'll pile on to previous gentleman's comments, but a sea story, we'll see if it resonates and it answers the mail. If not, we'll delete it again. So something near and dear to my General Watson's heart is an expeditionary striker, So 3 to 4 ships, about 5,000 folks, an awful lot of Marine ground forces, and a lot of Marine air assets. We spend an exquisite amount of time with technology that's provided by industry partners and academia to monitor our electronics measures 24/7, and we're pretty good at it, and we assess ourselves. So envision an expeditionary strike group going across the pond, and to the best of our ability, we have to maintain undetected, not being detected. And we're doing very, very well at this for 4 consecutive days. We can't be found. We're managing our electronics imagery because of the technology that we're given. And on a routine day, a well-intended pair of young warriors goes up to the flight deck, and they know the rules, they know what kind of posture the ship is in electromagnetically, and they turn on an iPad. Unbeknownst to us, because we weren't utilizing the technology that our industry partners and academia had given us, that we could have been monitoring for that. Well, we were not, but the people that were looking for us certainly were, and they were able to find us because those 2 kids want to play Candy Crush. The moral of the story is, I was involved in that evolution and got schooled that day on, hey, we should have been looking here also for something as simple as an iPad being turned on, that literally a training environment gave away the entire position of the expeditionary structure.
Thank you very much. Mr. Stewart?
So I won't belabor the point, but I can give you a sort of a sea story. I remember during Desert Storm, you're talking about perhaps a misapplication or a better application of technology. We had GPSs, the first generation GPSs, and it was a big box, and we literally had to hold them over our head, trying to get a signal, trying to fly around the Persian Gulf. hoping we weren't straying in some place we shouldn't have been, right? So yes, it was great. We had a GPS. The cloud was about the size of a laptop. The other thing that we had was UHF radios, and then the Saudis were communicating on VHF, we flying for Riyadh, and the VHF radios weren't working terribly well, so you have to sort of be well inside Saudi airspace when they would pick you up and hopefully not be shooting you down. The point of the story is that I told that story years later when I met the DIX, I think the second director. He told me a story about flying around in an F-16 with an iPad with a GPS map. And it's just sort of an example of sometimes industry will be way out ahead of us, and if we could have adopted that technology a lot quicker, it would have helped us. So again, what I think about is how do I adopt the technology quickly, because perhaps the next conflict is going to be fairly, I'm not sure we're going to have a ton of lead time potentially. So you've got to have the technology ready to go.
To go right into the next question then, that for you, Mr. Stewart, is do you see there are areas and technology focuses that are more applicable or more easily exploited through events like ANTX? Is there a field of study or a commercial product that you think is prime for military use?
Well, certainly I'm seeing what's going on with, what you pick a company, FedEx, Amazon, Tesla, what they're doing in unmanned, and I've got to imagine that they've done a lot of things and figured out a lot of things that we're trying to figure out, particularly in unmanned, right? I think about the notion of a FedEx airplane landing in LAX and then putting on a FedEx drone and sending this package out over, sort of suburbia. I'm not sure that's a denied environment, but it's certainly not not necessarily a non-permissive environment, but I've got to imagine some people are trying to knock that drone down. So it would be interesting to see how these guys solve sort of cyber issues or a reliable network, if one network's denied, how do they solve resiliency problems? So yeah, particularly non-manned, I can see that industry would love to learn from them. There's a bunch of different applications we like to use, and how do you solve those problems?
Thank you. To you, General Watson, either do you see there are areas for technology exploitation, or do you have success stories that you've seen recently with an ANTX that you'd like to share?
Yeah, we've really had, I think, a pretty good run of success stories from recent ANTXs. And I think that's really important because, if you want, it's kind of, playing a lottery. If nobody ever wins, then nobody buys a ticket. But so we think that's important, and not just have we found it easy to do because of some of the really interesting, helpful technologies that have materialized through ANTXs, but it's important to go into that with the idea that we are going to invest in some of the things that come through it. I think the things where we need the most help, a couple of them have already been spoken to. I think RADM Fillion and Mr. Bray, but battle management is one, and I would take the expeditionary strike group example of understanding yourself in spectrum of managing your signature down to the individual level. So I think down at the very small unit level for the individual infantryman, or small unit leader walking around on the battlefield. I mean, if you take seriously, sort of the idea that if you can be sensed, you can be located. If you can be located, you can be targeted. If you can be targeted, you can be killed. Then emitting in any facet, any piece of the spectrum, is really it puts you in an untenable position, and your entire unit in an untenable position. So how do you get that to a form factor, where a small unit leader, a leader of 4 or 5 Marines or sailors on the battlefield there somewhere, can just first understand their signature? Am I emitting? Because in today's day and age, the Internet of Things and all that, it's not just that we're keying a radio. I mean, there are things that put out unintended emissions that sometimes we just don't understand. I'm a history major, so it's not intuitive to me sometimes that a certain piece of equipment is actually emitting in a spectrum that can allow me to be located and detected. So I think that's important. And then I think what Mr. Stewart was getting at is logistics. Contested logistics is maybe our hardest operational problem, I think, in the context of our pacing adversaries and where the NDS is pointing us as a department. So a lot of really interesting things going on in the logistics field in terms of automation, but also I think we've got to look at demand reduction, and a huge part of all this has got to be getting off fossil fuels. So in terms of looking deep, how do we, those are areas where I think there's a lot of opportunity space for industry to help us.
Thank you very much. going to shift over to a question for Admiral Fillion. So, in your role as a senior leader and the requirements and resourcing of capabilities, how do you balance guiding the focus of S&T studies, war games, and experimentation without making it too prescriptive? Do you see how there's a good balance between providing or proving out some of our legacy fleet capabilities and transitioning to more disruptive technologies?
Well, I'll tell you, the process is such that when we have that issue, that debate on whether or not we put a dollar towards this asset or that asset, it's in a room, and there's warfighters in there, there's members of the Secretariat, RDA. On occasion, we have industry people coming in to tell us, make sure we understand capabilities of how we're monitoring our signature, for instance. And we debate, and then, as I said earlier on, we put it up against the defense planning guidance, the CNO's maritime strategy, the Commandant's guidance, and the IPL's, the integrated priority list from our fleet commanders. They send us, here are the things that are the most important to us in our particular AOR. Little stovepipe there because they're concerned about one particular zip code, where we in the building with that warfighting team and our brothers and sisters in the Secretariat have to look at stewardship. We use the word stewardship. What's best for the Naval Marine Force? And Naval Marine Force is me and my brother in green, and all the men and women out there who wear the uniform to get the daily job done every day. That's how we do that. And that strategy there, and there is conflict, as you well know, because you've been close to it sometimes, and you never have consensus, and you never make a decision that everybody applauds. It's just the nature of the business. But it's about what brings the most, what allows us to deliver the most lethal, capable naval force.
Thank you very much. Move over to a question for Mr. Bray. So, as we try to focus our S&T dollars, how do we get the message out to enterprise of what's truly of value? So, how do we ensure engineers, scientists, industry, and academia actually understand the problems from the warfighter? And how do we do this in a way that we're not actually divulging gaps or sensitive information? It may come around.
It's a good one, and actually build off Admiral Fillion. To me, one of the things I've seen is the challenge of figuring out how you take, and some of these technologies that we see in ANTX and other areas, they're not billions of dollars. And frankly, they're not even tens of millions. Sometimes they're a relatively small amount of dollars required to invest in it. Not necessarily to get it into the warfighter's hands tomorrow, but to move it to the next step. And I think that's one of the things we have to think through. The Palm process certainly helps us vet that. But one of the things Mr. Gertz has recently done is he stood up the R&D board, the Research and Development Board. It's not a Palm board, it's a separate board. He wants to talk at a strategic level. Are we investing in the right areas and the right technology pieces? And so as we look through that lens, the idea is to bring concepts, ideas, investment strategies in key capability areas to the board. The board is him, the VCNO, and ACME. So we have the Marine Corps and the Navy sitting with Mr. Gertz to kind of look at that space. And so we just held the first one, actually this week, August 10th. And as an example, the area we chose to really look at was intelligent autonomy. Why is that an important area? Well, one, it cuts across all domains. It cuts across air, surface, subsurface, as well as land. Two, if we want to be effective in the future, they have to communicate across those domains effectively. So figuring out what is our strategy and how we're going to do that is very, very important. And then the investment piece, I think, is important, right? We don't want all four domains investing in the same areas. We want to make sure we're taking advantage of the dollars that are going in different areas. And if someone is working an algorithm for X, we shouldn't be investing in that. We should be going Y. And that can roll down into that BA1, BA3, the S&T portfolio, to now help us align that along those investment areas. So to me, that's an important piece. And I think it can become a method or a pathway for new technologies to get funded, new capabilities to get identified, and then brought into the Palm process, perhaps in a different way.
Do you mind if I piggyback on that?
Absolutely, go.
So the first time I met Mr. Bray, I was new to the job, and he had asked me to come over for Secretary Gertz. They were doing something where I'm trying to make acquisition faster, OTAs or in mid-tier acquisition authorities, all that sort of thing. Now as the 9, and what I was curious about was, I mean, I certainly understood you wanted to acquire things faster. The question I had is, what do you want to acquire? So I was trying to figure out how do you go from NDS, the National Defense Strategies, which was, Communist Planning Guidance, all the way through the POMP process to get a validated requirement, right? And piggyback on the General's comment of having a virtuous cycle of understanding what problem you were trying to solve, key operational problem, breaking it down, and having, looking at the technologies, but also then having a feedback loop with war games or whatever, an ANTX. And so to answer your question, so when Mr. Bray then said, hey, can you come down and talk to warfare centers and talk to technologists? Sure. And what I heard loud and clear from them was, hey, tell us what you guys are working on. If you've got an NDS, what are the key operational problems you're trying to solve? And so to go to your thing about don't be too prescriptive is trying to just say, look, this is what we're trying to solve. You guys may know ways that you can solve it in a different way than we do. But it was really getting the connective tissue of having the requirement side in close connection with the acquisition side, right? So there's a feedback loop. So just, really basically saying this is kind of, people talk about the Apollo moonshot of, what was the guidance? Put man on moon. Okay, got it. And then guys broke down the problem. So it's having that sort of discussion.
Yeah. I think that dynamic is really, really key to be able to understand the operational problems. That gets us focused on working on the right.
So one thing that I've learned actually in my quick time with OpNav here in the 9 is one of the interesting concepts, again, mostly being my prior military career is a lifetime ago. But seeing things in communication tools such as the maritime fight brief, I've been mostly an engineer and a scientist for the last 15 years, but understanding what the actual image in the picture of the future fight is going to look like. It's been really important to me to frame my understanding as an engineer or a scientist, what's of value. So I want to continue to promote tools like that. I know we've been passing that around the building and a lot at the higher levels, but maybe getting information and communication tools again, because it could be as simple as promoting what do we want to do. If it's putting a man on a moon, an engineer can find 100 ways to do that. Whereas if we try to tell them a precise way to deliver a product, we're really, narrowing down our opportunity space. So. I guess real quickly though, from General Watson, have you had any success or do you see any challenges? You've done, again, a lot more with the ANTX space. Are you seeing a lot more draw from industry that's starting to learn from this, or are they engaging more? Are they starting to understand the mission? Are you seeing more repeat business, I guess, with more informed products?
Yeah, and I think we've had a pretty steady, particularly in the context of COVID, a pretty steady response to the latest, commercial solutions offering for the ANTX that we have upcoming. So I think, particularly considering the environment, that's really important. I think one of the things I just wanted to add to what Mr. Bray mentioned earlier is context when it comes to the operational problem. I think that's one of the things that is most valuable in helping make us successful in getting good offerings from commercial industry and drawing interest across a broad range of sectors. Is that it's not, and this relates to classification to your earlier point. But it's not just about what is the operational problem, whether it's weather or whether it's, more importantly to us, threat, but whether it can be a threat, right? So it's understanding the conditions under which we have to solve that operational problem, under which we have to execute a given type of mission. So putting a man on the moon is one thing, but if somebody's trying to stop you from getting there, that's another. And if you have to do it with high solar winds or whatever, you take that to its logical conclusion, then the way that you've got to approach from a design perspective, from a technology and engineering perspective, the solution to that problem gets to be very different. So what we try to do with the ANTX as well, because there's a pretty robust, intelligence, counterintelligence environment when it comes to a lot of the things that we're after and the problems that we're trying to solve. So we try to adapt our approach and our pitch in ANTX to various classification levels, so the multi-level security. And for companies that are capable of having a conversation at a higher level of security, then we set the conditions for that and we have that conversation with them. But for those that can't, your mom and pop joint out of Joe's garage that just wants to come in and talk at an unclassified level, we'll adapt to that as well and try to ensure that there's utility for all of them to participate.
If I can pop on too, from an acquisition standpoint, talked a little bit about this earlier. You know, we view the ANTX events as kind of a low barrier of entry for industry. So it allows various players to come in, large, small, mid-size, traditional, non-traditional industry partners to come in. And so I think that's an important piece. Again, what technology they're bringing is valued, and then we invite the right technologies in to help solve that operational problem. But I think that piece has been very good for industry, particularly the non-traditional, the smaller companies, but also the large companies. We've had many of the large companies come in with some significant capabilities. The other piece to that, though, is you know, we want to make sure that if they do come and they bring their wares, that we are looking at how do we take the technology we view of value to that next level. And so as we've looked at the main ANTX events, the big events, we've kind of done some benchmarking. So about 20% or so of the technologies that were demonstrated at an event do get carried forward to some other venue, either to a bigger event, maybe there's an investment done to make it, to improve the capabilities, or it could get into the warfighter's hands. But looking at how that carries forward, I think is an important piece. Is 20% right? I don't know, 0 is wrong, 100% is wrong too, right? Because if everything's getting into the warfighter hands, that means we're not, in my opinion, looking at, you know, disruptive technologies, new ideas. So it's somewhere between 0 and 100, but we've at least benchmarked that, we can look at that. Some of the other smaller ANTXs, I think, add a lot of value as well, and I think that's where you get some very specific items, whether it's the events that are up at Newport for undersea warfare, NRDE doing some things, that the XWIC folks have done some events. So you see the ANTX at a smaller level and a larger level, really bringing in a lot of those different industry partners, local industry partners, local academia, and I think that's the value you get, because you get a lot of new ideas, new innovations, new partnerships going forward. And then the final thing I would say with industry that we've really built in, again, to most of the events, is we do give industry players feedback when they leave. So we try to give them technology work. Here's what the warfighter said. Here's what the engineer said. This was the good, the bad. So at least they can walk away and say, geez, if we can improve in these 3 areas and make investments through their IRAD, we can come back again to the next event and maybe fare better. So we try to build those type of things in for our industry partners that are playing as an incentive.
So thank you. I think we're getting down to about the last 10 minutes, so before I kind of occupy all your time or drive all the time, I'm going to give each of you a chance to kind of just speak of what you see for the future of ANTXs and where you kind of see the value or the opportunity space that you think is worth pursuing. So if you want to start right here, Mr. Stewart.
So the question is, how do I see ANTXs evolving?
Where would you like to see them evolve to? What areas do you think, I guess, would be the value or the right direction to go?
So I'll answer it kind of this way. So I've seen how the Marines have been doing ANTXs, and I think they've got a great virtuous cycle. They know what the problem is, they know what the technology is, they test it. And I think the Navy can learn a lot from the Marine Corps and how to use an ANTX better, right? I think the Navy is now entering a period of potentially a lot of innovation, right? As we're changing from the warfighting doctrine per the NDASN and some other doctrines. And so I think it's incumbent upon me and 9I and OPNAV, how do you really use it? Actually, and O&R and the RDT&E community, really let's get a tighter cycle. So you guys understand what the problem that we're trying to solve is. You guys are bringing us technology so we get to see it, and then just sail past and just have the exposure to new technology. So I think, to answer your question, I think we as an agency have to get better at them and really understand how to utilize them properly. And I think the Marine Corps has given us a great example of how to do it.
Thank you. Admiral?
Yeah, I don't think I could add much to what Michael just said, other than that, this organization, NavalX, your organization, to Mr. Bray's point about the R&D boards, we schedule ANTX, we put a demand signal out there, hey, we need help with X, Y, and Z, and then industry and academia come in and bring us solutions. I think everybody in the sound of my voice looking at us was going to nod their head up and down, but sometimes we, the DoD, are not the easiest customer to work with. We understand that. So help us get out of our own way. What do I mean by that? We put a demand signal out there for you. Say that me and General Watson, our ESGs, Expeditionary Strike Groups, are near and dear to our heart. Our being able to manage our signature underway, and then when we get to the destination and deliver Marines ashore, how we protect down to that fighting unit that he talked about, their signature. If you've got a 20% solution on that, we will never ask you for that. We always want the 80% solution that's been tested 55 times. If you've got a 20% solution, force us to look at it. Bring it to us through this conduit. Because we understand, you know, we work in the Pentagon, we know how much fun it is. So bring it to somebody like this organization to get our attention. And I offer that we talked about it in the pregame here a little bit. Mr. Bray and General Watson spoke to it. You don't have to wait for that ANTX. You know we're working on signature management. If you're doing something in signature management, corporate partners, academia, and you've got a 20% solution on how to prevent the kid turning on his iPad and giving the position away of 5,000 warfighters, bring it to us. We will force us to do our job better, force us to listen.
Thank you.
So, you know, I think the important piece with ANTX is and one of the mind modules for the last 3 years has been tools in the toolbox. Right? It's not let's hang our hat on one thing and that's it and we're going to focus on that. I think we've done that a lot in the past. So when I look at ANTXs, I see them as a really good ideation event, an event where you can look at technologies, bring forward ideas, affect tactics and doctrine, but also figure out where technology fits. I think that tight coupling that we talked about between the warfighter, the OpNav, the Marine Corps is very, very important with the NRDE, and starting with that key operational problem. I think we can do that, put ANTX in its right role, and then how does it fit with flex events or fleet exercises and other things to do that connection. I think it can become very, very powerful in that virtuous cycle we all want to get to. I think we can kind of do that iteration. The other piece I think is really, really important, some of the other tools that are already in the toolbox that we've tried to bring into ANTXs are things like modeling and simulation and the overall infrastructure that the warfare centers and labs have today. There is organic capability that doesn't necessarily require us to run a full-scale event. We can do a lot of work early on beforehand and really drive that. So to me, I think those are kind of some of the key pieces going forward that we need to continue to build on that live virtual constructor construct and how does it all fit.
Thank you. General?
Well, it's hard going last in this group with all the intelligence to take it.
What you do with the common choice?
So I would just try to pull on a couple of quick threads there, and I think the live virtual constructive environment. I'm glad that Mr. Bray brought that up. I think that's really important. I think in terms of how we generate, head speed and momentum going forward, and I think so at the Warfight Lab, we're investing a lot in trying to become better integrated with the Navy through. We're working closely with NavalX and the Naval integrated LVC environment and DARPA's DE2 experimentation environment, and we think there's a lot of opportunity space there. And then you particularly put that in the context of COVID and other things that limit travel and participation, and that the opportunity to model things and test them in the LVC environment is really tremendous. So I think there's a great space there. And the only other thing I would say is, I think these are ANTXs are naval, but some are more Marine and some are a little more Navy. And I think there's greater opportunity to sort of collaborate there and network these events in the sense that, the Marines have sort of taken a little bit of a longer term, more deliberate approach to these to clearly define the operational problem and the threat and the context, and then give industry some time to start to develop solutions, put some IRAD against potential commercial solutions, and then we bring those in, we test them, and we put them in an operational environment that allows for the operators and engineers to get together to really assess the effectiveness and the opportunity for these to help. The Navy is a little bit more iterative, and they move quickly through these, a little bit more narrowly define the scope, but also don't give industry quite as much time to answer the question. So I think maybe a marriage where, as Mr. Bray said, the importance of iterating afterwards and spiral development. So if we identify promising opportunities, in the more deliberate ANTXs, then there might be opportunity to use the smaller, more rapid turn ANTXs to take particular technology threads that we think just need a little bit more work or need to be explored in a little more depth. And we use those more iterative ANTXs. But that'll take a little bit of work and just increased focus on naval integration. I'm sure we can get there.
Thank you all very much. So unfortunately, we're coming down to the end of our time here. I want to thank NavalX again for coordinating and hosting this event, providing me the opportunity to be here with such a distinguished panel. For those of you on the audience and on the outside that are interested in things like advanced naval technology exercises, please keep in touch with NavalX community. Keep in touch with the TechBridge community is probably some of the best outreach out there. I believe that's also being advertised and communicated through the Navy Postgraduate School and their social media sites. But again, we welcome all comers. We want people to be engaged in these events. It's a great opportunity. I hope you enjoyed the talk today, and I'll say stay safe and thank you again.